People have been asking me to talk about politics for a really long time. Is Donald Trump a cult leader? Is the Republican Party a cult? Is the Democratic Party a cult? This might seem like a very America-centric video, but stick around if you're from outside the US. The ideas apply to more than just America. Let's get into it. I'm not planning on turning political on this channel. I'm gonna keep it as it's always been. This is probably the only video I'll ever do on this subject, but I feel like I need to put my feelings on record. First, we need to talk about a term called cult of personality. What is a cult of personality? The term traditionally relates specifically to political leaders, but I think it can apply to a lot more than just them nowadays. For example, you've got massive Logan Paul fans, or massive Michael Jackson fans, or Bill Cosby fans. Well, not so much anymore, but still, there are lots of people out there who will unquestioningly follow these people as leaders and defend them to the death. Think about the whole Bill Cosby situation. Dude is a monster, and everybody knows that now. But he still has defenders out there, even though he's been criminally convicted. So why do people still support him? Why do people continue to pretend that it's all made up, despite the mountains of evidence? Because they revere him. Because they respect him. Lots of people grew up on his comedy and TV appearances. I can understand that. But one thing we all need to be aware of is the fact that unquestioning loyalty to any one person, group, or idea is one step down the wrong path. So we'll start there. No one person should be above criticism. That should be a given. Now, don't think I'm just targeting right-wing people here. I'm not. My brother is conservative and I have no issue with that. I don't agree with conservatism in the US at this point in time, but there are times in history when it's necessary. For example, in a communist or socialist government, some conservative ideals might actually be very helpful. I'm a Bernie Sanders supporter, and as such, I think that capitalism should be mixed with some socialist programs, like Social Security. I think that's a fantastic program and it should be expanded. Or Medicare. I think we should use socialist programs and ideas to fill in the gaps where pure capitalism fails. Bear in mind, I think the means of production and supply should always be private. But there are some glaring problems with pure capitalism, and the fact that some people are afraid of accepting that is a sign that they're too used to loaded language and cliches to think clearly about it. If you hear certain words and have a visceral reaction, you should examine those feelings and figure out why. Why are you having a visceral reaction to words? Now, I'm sure I have some Trump supporters in my audience, so let me get this out of the way right now. I have absolutely no problem with you guys. I don't hate anybody for anything. I think you're living your lives and doing what you think is right. If you didn't think it was right, then you probably wouldn't be doing it. It's just that we differ on a few points. We should be able to talk about this stuff and work through it without being at each other's throats. So let's work through it. As far as Trump goes, I think the thing that helped Bernie Sanders rise to fame is the same thing that helped Trump rise to fame. Clear corruption in the political system. People get sick of it, and they feel like breaking out of the standard mold was the only way to stop the corruption. I just think that Trump has been selling out to big interests since he was like 3 months old, and didn't expect it to be any different when he became president. But think about this. I'm sure a lot of you know the BITE model. The BITE model is a model we use to help us figure out what's a cult and what isn't. Just like the model for cults, we also have a model for authoritarian leaders. A lot of the time, certain governments are set up in such a way as to prevent dictators from ever taking power. Like the US Constitution, for example. It's set up with checks and balances. In fact, the Judge John Marshall from the mid-1700s set up the checks and balances system by evaluating decisions the executive branch made to determine if it was constitutional or not. That was the start of the checks and balances system. And if a single political party holds control of all three branches, it's expected that they'll be looking out for the good of the country, and they won't all fold to pressures around them. But when the entire political party adheres to a specific ideology, it becomes a problem. It's unlikely that the US will ever become a dictatorship. It's not impossible. I look at North Korea and I think about how the entire place, the entire population, is basically a cult. The citizens are all cult members, and they'll all report on each other if they catch them doing something wrong. So honestly, I never underestimate the sway or power of a government. Ever. It's possible. Whatever it is, it's possible. Now, we've seen tons of dictators throughout history. Duterte, Erdogan, Putin, Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un, and lots of others. I'm sure I don't need to name them. Those are just the active ones, and they aren't the only ones either. So let's take a look at the model we use to figure out if a leader is going in an authoritarian or dictator-like direction. Watch out for these signs from any leader, even from political candidates, not just active leaders. If you see a presidential candidate coming into the race and exhibiting any of these traits, just be wary. 1. Expand your power base through nepotism and corruption. Try to set up a dynasty-like system and sell out to whoever pays the most. I'm sure you guys are catching on at this point that I'm liberal, but I'm not tied down to any one political party or candidate. For context, I'll tell you I voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary and Clinton in the general in 2016. But the Clintons tried to set up something of a dynasty. Bill Clinton ran first, Hillary Clinton ran twice, and Chelsea, their daughter, tried to get heavily involved in politics. George H.W. Bush got the presidency, then George W. Bush got it. Get as many family members as you can into political office, even if it isn't just the presidency. The Kennedys did it too. It's not the only factor, but it is a factor. That, and take as much money as you can from whoever will pass it out. Make as many friends as possible. 2. Crucify the media. Claim they're lying about everything. There's a saying from another famous dictator we all know from Germany in the 1940s. The saying is Lügenpresse, which translates to lying press. If you want to be a dictator, this one is absolutely necessary. Say whatever you have to say to make people distrust the only source of information, the only people who could destroy your reputation. Number 3. Instigate a monopoly on the use of force to curb public protest. This one basically means make sure the police and military are more powerful than the people who could force political change by violent means. In the Western world right now, we're dealing with an issue where everybody and their dog has a grenade launcher, and the military would still crush a resistance if one rose up. So the real key for the president, for example, is to make sure he controls the military completely. Congress in the US recently passed a law that requires Trump to get congressional approval before taking militaristic action on Iran, so the military isn't completely under Trump's control. But honestly, I think the biggest issue we need to face with this is the militarization of police forces. Police shouldn't need tanks, for example. Number 4. Create a common enemy and whip people up into a blood frenzy over it. A good example of this in the UK is the UKIP policy of banning head coverings. Now, I know there's a legitimate danger coming directly from people with head coverings, but fostering fear of the other isn't helping. You see the same thing in the US right now. Fear of immigrants. They're all stealing our jobs and bringing crime and drugs and all that other stuff. Come up with some convincing sound bites that place you in a superior position and get people all riled up and ready to take action against the outgroup. Number 5. Get rid of your political enemies. This doesn't have to be as direct as killing them, though that does happen all the time in other countries, like Russia. That's been a serious problem. But it can be indirect too, like currying favor with all of their friends until they're your friends instead. Then do public character assassination. Number 6. Accumulate power by manipulating the hearts and minds of your citizens. The first step to becoming a dictator is slowing the flow of free information. Tell people they should go to this thing or that thing for the news, and nothing else. If you notice, North Korea has a single news outlet, and Kim Jong-un is the only thing on it 24/7. This should sound familiar. Think Bite model again. Cults do this all the time, and if you notice, the media in the US is pretty polarized. You're either with Team Red or Team Blue. MSNBC is left-wing, and Fox News is right-wing. They each spit out propaganda in their own ways, though I think one is way worse about it than the other. You're hard-pressed to find a fair, honest news source in the US, though Reuters and BBC aren't awful. And finally, number 7, create an ideology to justify the exalted position. The Republican Party in the US has been justifying its positions primarily through Christian ideology. It all follows and links back to Christianity in some way. Why do we need healthcare? God provides the ultimate healthcare in heaven. Not only are we pro-life, but we're also abstinence only. There are a ton of ideologically driven political positions, and they're all very inconsistent. So let's take a look at a few of them. Now, I've mentioned the Republican Party a few times so far. Remember, I'm not talking about conservatives. I'm talking about the Republican Party in the US. Here's an example. Climate change. There's so much propaganda spreading around about climate change. The Republican talking point started out as, it's not real, and then changed to, it's real, but it's not man-made. When right now, the statistics show that 2% of Democrats say that moving toward 100% renewable energy sources like solar and wind is costly and unnecessary. But 30% of independents hold that position, and 50% of Republicans do. Where did that split come from? Climate change is an issue that we need to face as a species. It's real whether people like it or not. And just like Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons having talking points on hand for any situation, the Republican Party has talking points on hand for climate change denial. The climate has changed before, or it's not a bad thing, or the earth is cooling, not warming up, or there's no consensus. All of that is heavily twisted to ignore facts at best and flatly false at worst. And every time it snows, you've got some Republican congressman coming out talking about how climate change isn't real because there's snow, ignoring the facts of the situation, ignoring the science. It doesn't help that extremist Republicans like Ted Cruz run committees overseeing things like NASA and science funding. And guess what happened when he took over?
There's no doubt that there are multiple important priorities within NASA, but I would suggest that almost any American would agree that the core function of NASA is to explore space.
The fact that earth science has increased, I'm proud to say, it has enabled us to understand our planet far better than we ever did before, because it's absolutely critical. We can't go anywhere if the Kennedy Space Center goes underwater and we don't know it. As Senator Nelson said, it is absolutely critical that we understand Earth's environment, because this is the only place that we have to live.
He defunded them because they were putting too much time into climate research. What's the point of that? It's unquestioning loyalty to an ideology. Damn the data, doesn't matter. Just adhere to the ideology that God will prevent anything bad from happening to planet Earth. Anything else is a waste of time. Another inconsistency is the fact that the Republican Party, as a party, is both pro-life and pro-abstinence only, despite the fact that we have statistics showing that areas with abstinence-only education have higher rates of pregnancy. Do they want lower abortion rates or not? If you want lower abortion and STD contraction, then you should be teaching people about safe sex, not that they shouldn't be doing it at all, because it's going to happen. That's biology. Even if you're going to teach them abstinence only, at least show them how to do it safely. It's completely inconsistent, and it only makes sense if it's being fueled by a higher ideology. Here's another example. Net neutrality. Remember when all that was happening? Giant corporations were basically lobbying to try to make it so they could pay extra to take priority over smaller companies. For example, Netflix wanted to be able to pay extra to take priority on the internet lines. Then small businesses would be out of luck. There's one obviously correct answer here. Keep everything fair and neutral. Internet service providers shouldn't be able to arbitrarily slow down traffic to competitors, or to anybody at all. Just keep it a level playing field. And what was the standard Republican position on this subject?
The president last week came out for the FCC treating the internet as a public utility. The worst thing that could happen is letting a whole bunch of politicians come in and regulate every aspect of what you're doing. The reason the internet has had the dynamism, the opportunity, the freedom, the diversity is because it hadn't been plagued by excessive regulation.
This clip is absolutely golden. You can hear him playing off the fears of regulation. It's a buzzword. It's loaded language. When some people hear regulation, they instantly think it's something negative. But think about this. I'm sure we can all agree that monopolies are a bad thing, right? Competition in an economic system is desirable because it fuels innovation. So if there's no competition in the economic system, innovation starts to fall flat. Monopolies generally are not good. We have regulations in the US designed to break up monopolies, if they exist. Are regulations bad in that case? How about this one? Lots of internet service providers like Comcast, Frontier, Cox Communication, AT&T, and others work together to create what's called an artificial monopoly. They all agree not to go into each other's districts. I only have one ISP in my area. That way they can set the prices to be whatever they want. There's no competition and there's no regulation. That's an obscenely anti-capitalist situation. Where's the regulation to prevent artificial monopolies like that? Are regulations bad in this case too? What Ted Cruz is saying here is so disgustingly disingenuous, and it's depressing because it's working. This guy is scary good at spreading propaganda and creating talking points. It's genuinely disturbing. I wonder how many people have died or lost their homes to flooding because of the legislation he has passed to prevent research into climate change. Here's another. The Heritage Foundation is a very influential group that comes up with lots of conservative ideas. In fact, Obamacare was largely formed out by the Heritage Foundation for Mitt Romney. It was a version of his plan originally, and Obama co-opted it. So Republicans were all 100% on board when a Republican candidate presented it as an option. But the moment a liberal picked it up and made it happen, it all disintegrated. Suddenly you see lots of character assassination and screaming and baseless claims about it. What happened between then and now to make the Affordable Care Act so undesirable? So here we are now, and we've got some people who are seemingly very extreme in power in the US. When I think right-wing, I think Tea Party. Let's take a look at the Tea Party platform and see how they feel about how the government should be run. On their website, they have a section called Healthcare. It says, healthcare freedom means we can choose our own doctor and health insurance plans without penalty from government if we do not choose unneeded options. We are capable of making our own choices when it comes to utilizing our hard-earned money to protect and care for our families and ourselves. Obviously, what they're referencing here is something called the individual mandate. It's part of Obamacare. The rule is, if you have health insurance, then you don't get penalized for it. Why does that exist? The reason it exists is because right now, in a country of over 300 million people, health insurance costs are through the roof, completely unmanageable. So guess who doesn't get health insurance? Generally healthy people. The only people paying into the system are people who need it. And that means that the health insurance companies have to raise their prices to compensate for the fact that they're paying out a ton of money to doctors' offices and hospitals. The premiums aren't covering the costs they're putting out. And when somebody in their mid-20s gets sick and doesn't have insurance, they go to a hospital. Since it's so expensive, they don't pay it. And the hospitals have to charge out the wazoo to compensate for the fact that their patients aren't paying their bills. Which means the health insurance companies have to charge even more so they can make up for the fact that the hospitals are charging an obscene amount. It's a positive feedback loop. It gets worse and worse and worse. The only way to lower the costs and even out the system again is by mandating that everybody has health insurance. Even if it isn't through the government, even if it's on the private marketplace, the positive feedback loop is spinning out of control right now, which is why my health insurance costs were 33% of my total yearly income last year. So this whole bit from the Tea Party about how we shouldn't have to face a penalty for not having health insurance is disgustingly uninformed. It's just vomiting up all the same uninformed talking points you hear constantly. As I said, it's in a positive feedback loop right now. If you think healthcare is expensive now, just wait. It's gonna get worse before it gets better. And it isn't gonna get better until everybody is bankrupt or until something is done to break out of that cycle. You see a ton of stuff like this, completely uninformed on the science or on the economic impacts, and people just set in their ways. They refuse to understand why we need this change or that change because it's built off of a higher ideology. Think about why we're in the situation we're in right now, and honestly consider how we can fix it. Try to throw ideology and loaded language out the window. Throw out famous personalities. Just ignore it. Think about the best solution. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. I just want to mention I created a new YouTube channel where I talk about retro games and stuff. It's called Telltale Retro. I just did a video called Mario Kart 64 Sucks. So if you want to take a look, you can check the description or you can check the end card. If you like what I do and you want to see me continue to do it, then consider supporting me in one of three main ways. The first way is through Patreon. Right now, YouTube is way down, and it's very stressful knowing if they're going to demonetize me or something one day. So if you want to make sure I can continue doing this regardless of what YouTube does, then Patreon is a solid way. Also, you can support me on Teespring. I have a bunch of t-shirts and mugs and stickers and stuff on there. I'm trying to put a t-shirt for every cult I've done, but it's a long, slow process. And finally, you can support me by hosting your website with me if you have one. It kind of requires some advanced knowledge of website design and things like that. I use cPanel on a Linux VPS, so if you're unfamiliar with cPanel, WordPress, or Bash, it might not be for you, but it's something to consider. Also, don't forget to check out my podcast where I talk about the latest religious news and lots of other stuff. If you're interested in hosting with me, then send me an email through my work address, which is in the description. All the rest of the links are in the description too, as always. Okay, thanks for watching, guys.